Hello. In this video, I'm going to be answering a rather provocative question of whether ancient Greece knew about Saturn's rings. And specifically, I'm going to be referencing the myth of the castration of Uranus. Now, that seems like an absurd question at first. Of course, the ancient Greeks did not know about Saturn's rings. Saturn's rings were only discovered in 1610 by the famous astronomer and physicist Galileo Galilei, along with these other discoveries that he made, which are now well known in the scientific community, such as Jupiter's moons, the sunspots, the craters of the moon, and the phases of Venus. But could there be more to this story than is being told? Could ancient Greece have actually known about Saturn's rings in deep prehistory? Not only when not only during the period of classical Greece when these myths were first written down, but like centuries and even millennia before, maybe 2000 to 3000 BC. This would mean that the telescope had to have been invented by ancient man at some point in the past, and that an ancient Galileo, whose name has now been forgotten, once lived. Now, this is where the myth of the castration of Uranus comes in, or Uranos as he was known in the time of by the Greeks. Uranus is a romanization of Uranos. So this is one of the oldest Greek myths, the myth of the castration of Uranus, in which Kronos, who ultimately became the ruler of the universe, who was himself overthrown by his son Zeus, but before that happened, he actually overthrew his own father, whose name was Uranus, and he used a sickle to castrate his father, and he threw the remains of the testicles into the water, which ultimately gave birth to the goddess Aphrodite. And so, in my view, this myth actually represents the formation of Saturn's rings. Because if we look at Saturn from the Earth, we don't see an entire disk. We've only seen the entire disk shape of the ring by space probes that have actually been sent to Saturn. But from the Earth, Saturn's rings actually looks exactly like a sickle or a scythe that cuts through the globe of the planet itself. And so that's exactly the weapon that Kronos or Saturn used to castrate his father. And we also know that astronomers are strongly convinced that Saturn's rings were formed by the remnants of shattered moons, comets, and asteroids torn apart by Saturn's powerful gravitational field. Torn apart and shattered sounds very much like an astronomical version of castration. I mean, I don't know too much about castration, but I know that it's a violent act of destruction, and it involves tearing apart what was once whole. And that's exactly how the rings of Saturn were formed. And this is exactly the visual representation of the act of Kronos in which he castrates his father Uranus. And so this is what a scythe looks like on the left, or a sickle. This is exactly what a sickle looks like. It looks like a half of a disc. And that's exactly what Saturn's rings look like with a primitive telescope. If we can see Saturn's rings as clearly as we can in this image taken by a telescope, it wouldn't really be accurate to describe it as a scythe. But viewed with a primitive telescope, maybe one that an ancient version of Galileo would have had in his possession, it's very much possible to describe this ring as a sickle or a scythe, a long curved blade-like structure that if the ancient man had believed that this was formed by the destruction of another satellite, for example, that would make the castration myth to explain the origin of this ring as very much a appropriate metaphor. So in my view, it's very much possible that ancient man could have known about Saturn's rings, could have known about and even had a theory about its formation. This idea is very similar to the ideas put forth by ancient astronaut theorists who say that the ancient Dogon people of West Africa were aware of the presence of a companion star to Sirius, which is known as Sirius B and is a white dwarf star. And there is absolutely no way that they could have known about that unless their ancestors somehow had known about or had discovered a telescope and used it to view this star. And so, in my opinion, I believe that there is a source of ancient knowledge that it has been passed down over the ages about astronomy and that has been remembered in the form of myth. And I believe that the source of that myth ultimately is Atlantis.